The alien queen was close to losing the war, until a human in the crowd stood up. The alien queen sat on her throne, a figure of grace and authority, yet even her usual poise could not hide the worry etched into her face. The enemy fleets were advancing faster than anyone had predicted. Key planets had fallen, and supply lines were broken. Messages from her generals were grim, each one ending in the same word: surrender. The council had gathered to decide the next step. The air inside the hall was heavy with fear and doubt. Whispers carried from one end of the room to the other. No one wanted to be the first to speak, but everyone wanted the queen to act. She had always been a symbol of hope for her people, the one who inspired courage even when hope seemed lost. Today, however, the weight of the war pressed heavily on her shoulders. She looked around at the council members, scanning their faces. Some avoided her gaze, others stared at the floor. She could see the tension in their rigid postures, the faint tremor in their claws. Even the strongest warriors and most respected diplomats were afraid. And then she noticed the humans. They were a small group, sitting quietly in the corner of the hall, their bodies upright but calm. Humans were few in number, just observers invited by diplomatic channels. The galaxy considered humans minor, fragile, and inexperienced. They had no massive fleets, no powerful technology, and no history of interstellar conquest. They were a curiosity, a species to be tolerated at best and ignored at worst. The Queen's advisors had barely acknowledged them when the humans entered. They wore simple suits, unlike the ornate uniforms of the council members. Their movements were unhurried, and their eyes were bright with intelligence. She had been curious about them when they first arrived, but now, in the shadow of disaster, she had no time for curiosity. She had battles to plan, allies to rally, and a war to save. The council meeting began. Reports were read, each one worse than the last. The enemy had taken the outer rim planets with surprising speed. Supply convoys had been ambushed. Defense fleets were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Communications had been disrupted. The Queen listened carefully, noting every detail. Every loss was a threat to her empire. Every delay increased the chance of total defeat. "I do not see a way forward," said one council member, a tall alien with scales the color of molten metal. His voice shook, though he tried to mask it. "Our forces are scattered. Our allies hesitate. The enemy grows stronger by the hour. Surrender is the only option." Murmurs of agreement spread across the room. Another council member, a smaller, winged species, nodded gravely. "If we resist further, we risk annihilation. The cost will be the lives of millions of our people. We must negotiate before it is too late." The Queen's hands tightened around the arms of her throne. She had faced difficult decisions before, but never had the weight of an entire civilization rested so heavily on her alone. She could feel the fear in the room, like a heavy fog pressing against her skin. Her people were counting on her to find a solution, and she had none. She rose from her throne. "Enough," she said, her voice strong though her heart wavered. "We will hear no more talk of surrender. This council is here to plan victory, not admit defeat." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. The humans remained still, observing with calm eyes. Most of the council members avoided looking at them. Why would humans care about alien politics, they wondered. Then, a message arrived from the enemy. The hall's communication panel lit up, showing a massive warship hovering near the capital planet. The enemy's voice, amplified for all to hear, was sharp and cruel. "Alien Queen," it said, "your resistance is futile. Surrender immediately or your civilization will be destroyed." "We give you one cycle to respond," the council gasped. Some shrank back in fear. The Queen's advisors whispered frantic questions. How could the enemy be so bold? How could they demand surrender when so many worlds still fought? The Queen closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a deep breath. She felt the fear of her people, the fatigue of her soldiers, and the despair of those who had lost hope. She wanted to speak words of courage, but her mind felt empty. She almost gave in to the temptation of surrender. And then she saw movement in the corner of the hall. One human had stood up. The room fell into stunned silence. The council members turned in shock. Some whispered to each other. Who was this human? What did he think he could do? Humans were not warriors, not diplomats, not strategists. They had no authority in this hall. But the human did not move aggressively or speak loudly. He stood calmly, his posture straight, his hands folded in front of him. His eyes scanned the council, and finally he looked at the Queen. "May I speak?" he asked, his voice steady. The Queen hesitated, She could dismiss him, she could command him to sit, but something about the calm certainty in his voice made her pause. "You may speak," she said, her tone cautious but polite. The human nodded once and began. "I am not a general, I am not a ruler, I have no fleets to command and no armies to lead, but I have seen war before. My people have faced extinction more than once. We have been invaded, outnumbered, and underestimated, and yet we survived. We survived not because we were the strongest, but because we learned to adapt. We learned to endure. We learned to fight differently." The council members laughed quietly. A human lecturing the alien queen on strategy, the thought seemed absurd, but the human continued, ignoring the whispers and the laughter. "The enemy you face is powerful," he said, "but they are not perfect. They make mistakes. They underestimate hope. They expect you to fear them, and they expect your allies to falter. But if you act carefully, if you use patience and cunning, you can turn their strengths into weaknesses." He paused, letting his words sink in. The queen felt a flicker of something she had not felt in cycles: hope. This human, whom she had barely noticed before, spoke with clarity and insight. He saw things others had ignored. He understood that war was not just about power, it was about strategy, timing, and will. "Look at their supply lines," the human continued. "They stretch across systems. One mistake, one delay, and their fleet cannot operate effectively. Look at their overconfidence. They believe you will surrender without a fight. Use that. Do not attack blindly. Move carefully. Make them exhaust themselves. You do not need to match them ship for ship. You need to outthink them." The council members shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned, some looked skeptical, but the queen listened. She could feel her mind opening to possibilities she had not considered. For the first time in cycles, she felt that the war might not be lost. The human spoke for another few minutes, calmly and logically, pointing out weaknesses, suggesting tactics, and offering hope. He never demanded credit. He never boasted. He simply shared knowledge. And with each word, the queen felt a growing strength inside her. When he finished, the hall was quiet. The enemy's message still hung in the air, but now it felt less like a sentence and more like a challenge. The council members looked to the queen, waiting for her reaction. She rose from her throne again, her voice strong. "This human has reminded me of something important," she said. "We are not defeated yet. We have allies, resources, and minds capable of thinking beyond fear. We will not surrender. We will fight." The council members stared, some in disbelief. Could it really be so simple? Could one human, a species considered minor and weak, change the mood of an entire war council? The queen smiled faintly, a spark of hope returning to her eyes. "Prepare our fleets," she commanded. "Send messages to our allies. We fight differently now, not out of despair but out of strategy, not because we are forced but because we choose to survive." The humans remained seated after the speech, calm and quiet. They had done what was needed. They had reminded everyone that victory could still be possible. The queen's heart was lighter now. The war was far from over, but a path forward existed. And sometimes all it took was one voice, one perspective to change everything. As the council members left the hall to begin preparations, the queen stayed in her throne room a moment longer, watching the human. She did not understand how one being from a minor planet could see the truths that her entire council had overlooked. But she understood one thing clearly: perhaps humans were not to be underestimated. Perhaps in the shadows of defeat, they were exactly the allies she needed. And far above the galaxy, enemy fleets moved toward her planets, unaware that hope had returned, not in the form of more ships or stronger weapons, but in the quiet voice of one human who had dared to stand. The queen could not stop thinking about the human. His words had sparked something inside her, a quiet, stubborn hope she had not felt in cycles. She had ruled her people through decades of war, faced betrayal, and survived crises that would have broken lesser leaders. Yet this human's perspective, calm and clear, cut through the despair like sunlight piercing a storm cloud. She called a private meeting in the war hall's strategy room. Only her closest generals, advisors, and the humans would attend. The humans entered quietly, standing out among the alien crowd. They were not dressed in armor, nor did they carry weapons. Their presence was simple, but it radiated calm determination. The queen studied the human who had spoken earlier. "I want you to explain your plan," she said, "not as a suggestion, not as a theory, as if the survival of my people depends on it." The human nodded respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, "I cannot promise victory. But I can show you a path that may save lives and change the tide of the war. You do not need super weapons or fleets equal to your enemy. You need strategy, patience, and smart choices. The queen raised an eyebrow. Continue, she said. The human spoke carefully, outlining a plan unlike anything the queen's council had considered. First, he said, we stop thinking in terms of massive battles. We do not attack head-on. That will only destroy what little you have left. Instead, we strike small where the enemy is weak. We force them to stretch their forces thin. We make them react, not act. A general leaned forward. You mean guerrilla warfare? He asked, suspicion in his voice. The human shook his head. Not exactly. It is strategy using the same principles as guerrilla warfare, but on a larger scale. We identify weak points, supply ships, minor fleets, communication hubs. We hit them quickly, then vanish. Make the enemy overextend. Make them impatient. Every move they make, they waste resources and expose themselves to risk. The room went silent. The queen's advisors exchanged nervous glances. Some muttered under their breath that humans had no experience with galactic warfare. Others, however, could not ignore the logic in his words. The queen herself leaned forward. This human had observed the enemy carefully and found weaknesses others overlooked. The human continued. Second, we gather intelligence from allies and neutral worlds. The enemy believes that many species are too scared to act. We use that fear against them. Information is power. Even a single piece of knowledge can turn a battle around. You do not need to overwhelm them with force, you need to outthink them. Information alone will not defeat them, said one of the queen's generals. His voice was sharp, defensive. They have fleets that outnumber ours 10-1, ships that can destroy planets. How does your plan stop that? The human smiled faintly. It does not by itself. But it gives you control over the timing of engagements. If the enemy cannot predict your moves, they waste their strength. They fight battles they should not fight. They make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, you strike decisively. You do not need to match them fleet for fleet. You need to use your fleets where they matter most. The queen studied the human closely. He was calm, measured, and confident, not arrogant, but certain in his reasoning. She felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in cycles, she felt that the enemy might not be unstoppable. Perhaps there was a way to save her people. I will need specifics, she said. Locations, fleet sizes, timing. I cannot act blindly. The human nodded. I can help you with that. But I will need access to your intelligence reports and your commander's insights. Strategy alone is useless without information. The queen considered this. Trusting a human with such critical data was risky, but she sensed no deceit in his eyes. She made her decision. You will have access, but you must work quickly. Every cycle the enemy advances, we lose more ground. Over the next cycles, the queen, her generals, and the humans worked together. They studied enemy movements, intercepted communications, and identified weak points in the enemy's supply chains. The humans suggested clever diversions, small strikes that would confuse and frustrate the enemy. The queen watched as her generals, initially skeptical, began to accept the ideas. Even her most stubborn advisors admitted that the humans' logic was sound. The first test came on a small, contested planet near the outer rim. The enemy fleet had stationed a supply convoy there, confident that it would reach the colony safely. The Queen's fleet, guided by the human strategy, executed a carefully timed attack. Small, fast ships struck the convoy, disabled it, and vanished before the enemy could respond. The results were immediate. The enemy was furious. They had not expected a precise strike from a fleet so small. They scrambled reinforcements, wasting ships and resources. The Queen watched the reports with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Her people had won a victory not by force, but by cleverness. Word spread quickly. Even the council members who had doubted the humans began to see their value. The Queen's people felt hope returning. They began to fight harder with renewed determination. Allies who had been hesitant reached out, offering support. The human never sought credit. He adjusted plans, studied reports, and guided the Queen's forces with quiet precision. He worked in the background, like a chess player moving pieces across the board. The Queen began to rely on his judgment more than anyone else. But not everyone was pleased. Some council members whispered that humans were meddling in matters beyond their understanding. They worried that the Queen might rely too heavily on outsiders. Others feared the humans' ideas were risky and might backfire. The Queen listened to their concerns but remained firm. She had seen the results. The humans had changed the tide of small battles, and morale among her people was growing. She had learned an important lesson. Sometimes wisdom could come from the most unexpected places. As the cycles passed, the human continued to teach. He explained how to use patience as a weapon, how to avoid unnecessary losses, and how to exploit enemy weaknesses. He reminded the queen that wars were won not only by strength, but by endurance, creativity, and willpower. One evening, as the queen watched the stars from the war hall balcony, she spoke quietly to the human. "You are not like any being I have known," she said. The human shrugged. "We have survived because we learn quickly. We make mistakes, but we adapt. That is all." "You have given me hope," the queen admitted. "Hope I thought was gone forever." The human smiled. "Hope is more powerful than any fleet or weapon. It can change the course of events if people act on it." The next major engagement approached. The enemy believed that the queen's forces were scattered and disorganized. They were confident of victory, but the queen and the humans had prepared carefully. Every fleet movement had been calculated. Every strike had a purpose. Every action was designed to weaken the enemy without risking unnecessary lives. When the battle began, the enemy quickly realized something was different. Their attacks were countered not with brute force, but with precision. Supply lines were disrupted. Communication channels were compromised. Small, fast strikes caused confusion and frustration. The enemy grew aggressive and careless, making mistakes they would not have made against a conventional defense. The queen watched the reports come in. For the first time in cycles, she allowed herself a small smile. Her people were fighting with renewed strength, guided by the humans' wisdom. They were no longer merely trying to survive, they were beginning to win. After the battle, as the council gathered to review the results, whispers filled the room. "Humans," one council member muttered. "Perhaps we underestimated them." The queen remained silent but thoughtful. She had learned an important truth. In the galaxy, power was not always measured by ships or weapons. Sometimes the smallest voice could change the course of a war. Sometimes the unexpected could turn defeat into hope. The human remained in the corner, observing quietly. He said little, yet his presence was felt by all. He had proven that courage and intelligence, even from a single individual, could inspire and guide an entire civilization. The queen knew the war was far from over. The enemy was still strong, and challenges lay ahead. But now she had a strategy and a guide she could trust. She had hope, and hope was a weapon more powerful than any fleet. That night, as the stars shone above the capital, the queen reflected on the human who had stood up when no one else would. She realized something profound. Sometimes victory did not come from what one could do alone, but from the courage to act, even when the world expected silence. And in that quiet moment, the seeds of a new strategy were sown. One that would change the fate of her people, the course of the war, and perhaps the future of the galaxy itself. The queen paced the length of her strategy room. Reports of enemy movements arrived constantly, some more alarming than others. Her fleet was small compared to the enemy's massive forces, yet for the first time in cycles, she felt confident. She had a plan, not a plan of brute strength, but a plan that relied on intelligence, timing, and clever strikes. And guiding this plan was the human, calm and steady, standing quietly among her generals. The human had become a figure of quiet authority. He did not issue orders, nor did he demand attention. Instead, he shared ideas, analyzed reports, and suggested precise actions. The queen had given him access to intelligence reports, and he had studied every detail meticulously. He understood enemy supply routes, command hierarchies, and weaknesses that others had overlooked. "Your Majesty," he said as the council gathered for the next briefing, "we have a chance to strike where the enemy believes they are strongest, but we will do it in a way that makes them overextend. We will not fight them head-on, we will fight smart." A general frowned. "You mean we will attack smaller targets? How can that possibly matter?" The human shook his head. "It matters because they will react to every small strike. They will waste ships, fuel, and energy. They will grow impatient. They will make mistakes. And when they do, we will be ready to strike decisively." The queen nodded. "Prepare the fleets. We test this strategy immediately." The first mission was small, almost insignificant in the eyes of the enemy. A single transport convoy, heavily guarded but distant from the main fleet, was moving between supply stations. The Queen's fleet, guided by the humans' tactical plan, intercepted the convoy. Small, fast ships moved silently through the void. They struck precisely, disabling supply lines and escaping before the enemy could respond. The results were immediate. The enemy commanders did not expect such precision from a small force. They overreacted, sending larger fleets to secure minor sectors, leaving major areas vulnerable. Reports of confusion spread quickly, even reaching neutral worlds. The enemy appeared strong on paper, but their mistakes were multiplying. The Queen watched the reports with a sense of cautious satisfaction. Her generals began to whisper among themselves. Some were still skeptical, but many were beginning to see the wisdom in the humans' plan. Morale among the Queen's forces improved, even among soldiers who had been prepared for retreat. As the cycles passed, the human guided more missions. Each was small in scale but precise in impact. Communication hubs were sabotaged. Minor supply lines were disrupted. Enemy patrols were lured into traps and forced to retreat. With each success, confidence grew among the Queen's forces. They had learned to trust strategy over sheer numbers, but the enemy was not idle. They adjusted, sending scouts and reinforcements, trying to predict the Queen's next move. Yet the human had already anticipated their reactions. He suggested feints and diversions, creating the illusion of vulnerability while protecting key positions. The enemy fleet became frustrated, wasting ships and fuel on misdirected attacks. The Queen observed the human as he worked. He did not seek recognition. He never bragged about the victories. Instead, he focused on logic, calculation, and precision. The generals began to rely on his judgment more than anyone else's. His approach was methodical, unhurried, and surprisingly effective. Then came the first major test. The enemy had concentrated a fleet near a strategic planet, hoping to crush the Queen's forces and take control of the outer rim. The Queen and her council debated the options. Some generals suggested a direct assault, hoping to overwhelm the enemy with daring maneuvers. Others wanted to retreat and fortify their positions. The human intervened. "We do not attack them directly, we split our forces. A small fleet creates a diversion, drawing their attention. Meanwhile, our main fleet strikes a less defended supply station. The enemy will react instinctively and their fleet will divide itself. That is when we strike decisively." The Queen considered the plan carefully. It was risky, relying on timing, deception, and precise execution. But the results of previous missions gave her confidence. "Do it," she commanded. The operation began. Small ships slipped through enemy defenses, creating chaos and distraction. The enemy fleet responded immediately, leaving the supply station poorly defended. The Queen's main fleet moved in swiftly, striking the supply station with precise force. Key enemy resources were destroyed, crippling their logistics for several cycles. The enemy commanders were enraged. They had underestimated the Queen's forces, thinking they could be crushed with overwhelming strength. Now they were divided, frustrated, and vulnerable. Reports of the operation reached the council, and the Queen's generals could hardly believe the success. The human had guided them to victory without losing a single major fleet. The Queen addressed her council afterward. "Today, we have proven that victory does not always come from power alone. Intelligence, strategy, and timing are just as important as fleets and weapons. We will continue this way." The human remained quiet in the corner, his calm presence a reminder that victory required careful planning. He did not celebrate. He simply prepared for the next step, studying reports, analyzing enemy reactions, and refining strategies. The success inspired the Queen's people. Soldiers who had felt hopeless now trained with renewed vigor. Engineers repaired and upgraded ships with speed and efficiency. Allies who had been hesitant sent reinforcements, seeing that the Queen's forces were capable of clever, precise victories. But the enemy was learning too. They began setting traps, anticipating the Queen's moves and attempting to lure her forces into mistakes. The human adjusted strategies, predicting enemy reactions and countering them with subtle precision. The war became a game of intellect and endurance, each side testing the other's patience and foresight. In the midst of this, the Queen noticed something remarkable. Her people, once demoralized and fearful, were becoming confident. They trusted their leaders and strategies. They believed in themselves, and that confidence was contagious. Even humans, once underestimated, were now respected as equals in planning and execution. One evening, after a particularly successful operation, the Queen walked with the human on the balcony overlooking the capital planet. Stars sparkled above, distant and serene, in stark contrast to the chaos of war below. "You have changed the way we fight," the queen said. "I never imagined that one human could make such a difference." The human shook his head. "I only offered guidance. Your people acted. Strategy alone does not win battles, courage and determination do. You have both, Your Majesty." The queen smiled faintly. "Perhaps we underestimated humans before. Perhaps we assumed weakness where there is none. You see strength not in size or power, but in cleverness and endurance." The human nodded. "Exactly. Strength is not only measured in fleets or weapons. It is measured in the will to act, the ability to adapt, and the courage to continue when all seems lost." The next cycle brought a new challenge. A key allied planet had been attacked and occupied by the enemy. The Queen's forces had to respond quickly. She consulted with her generals, but ultimately the human strategic insight guided the plan. They split their forces, striking the enemy at multiple points simultaneously. Diversions, stealth attacks, and precise strikes forced the enemy to divide their strength. The occupied planet was freed with minimal losses. Civilians celebrated and morale soared. Soldiers cheered, feeling that victory was not only possible but near. The Queen reflected on how far they had come. Just cycles ago, she had faced defeat, fear, and despair. Now her people were learning to fight smart, to act with precision, and to trust their own abilities. And at the center of it all was the human who had stood up when no one else would. In the council chambers, whispers spread among the generals. "Humans, they think differently. They see what we cannot." Another whispered, "Perhaps we have underestimated them too long." The queen remained silent, watching the human quietly analyze maps and reports. She understood something important. Victory in this war would not come from brute force alone. It would come from careful planning, from patience, from courage, and from the ability to see opportunity where others saw despair. The human's guidance had transformed the queen's forces. Soldiers were no longer afraid. Generals no longer doubted. The people had hope. And the enemy, though powerful, had begun to make mistakes that could not be ignored. That night, as the queen watched the stars and the capital planet below, she realized that a single voice, one human who had dared to speak when others were silent, had changed everything. Hope had returned to her people. The tide of the war had begun to shift. And for the first time in cycles, the alien queen allowed herself to believe that victory, though difficult, was possible. The human stood quietly nearby, observing, thinking, and planning for the battles to come. He had not sought recognition, but he had earned the queen's trust and the respect of her people. And though the enemy still loomed large, the queen knew one truth: the galaxy had underestimated humanity at its peril. For now, patience and strategy would guide them. The next cycles would bring new challenges, but the queen felt ready. With the human at her side, she believed that her people could survive, and perhaps even win against overwhelming odds. And far beyond the war-torn sectors, enemy commanders began to whisper among themselves. Something was changing. The alien queen was no longer defeated. Her forces moved with precision, patience, and cunning, and somehow a species they had dismissed as minor and weak was at the center of it all. The human had become more than a guide. He had become a symbol of hope, ingenuity, and courage. And the galaxy would soon learn that underestimating humans was a mistake no one could afford. The war had reached a turning point. The enemy, once confident and unstoppable, now moved with hesitation. Their fleets, though massive, were overextended. Supply lines were stretched across countless systems, leaving gaps that could be exploited. The alien queen studied the reports with a sense of grim satisfaction. The human strategies were working. Small strikes, calculated diversions, and intelligence-based operations had begun to wear down the enemy's advantage. Her generals gathered in the council chamber, maps and holograms displaying enemy movements flickering in the dim light. Each map told a story of opportunity: a supply convoy left lightly guarded, a fleet isolated in deep space, a communication hub vulnerable to a sudden strike. The Queen's fleet had not grown in size, but its effectiveness had multiplied. The human stood quietly at the edge of the chamber, reviewing reports and adjusting plans. His calm demeanor contrasted with the tension around him. Generals whispered to each other, occasionally glancing at him with surprise. This human, once considered an outsider, now shaped the Queen's strategy at the highest level. The Queen addressed her council. "The enemy believes they control the galaxy. They have grown careless. Now is the time to act decisively, but we do not attack blindly. We move with precision and patience. Every strike will weaken them. Every reaction they make will be anticipated. Today, we turn their confidence against them. The council murmured in agreement. Some were still cautious, fearing that such reliance on unconventional tactics might backfire. But the evidence was clear. Previous operations had succeeded, enemy fleets had stumbled, and morale among the Queen's forces had risen. Confidence was returning to her people, and the enemy was beginning to falter. The first step was to strike the enemy's supply lines. The human explained the plan. We split our fleet into small, fast units. Each will target a different supply route. The enemy will scramble to respond. Their forces will be divided, their focus scattered. Once that happens, we strike at their isolated fleets. They will not see us coming. A general frowned. It is risky. If we are discovered too soon, we could lose everything. The human shook his head calmly. We act quickly and precisely. We strike where they do not expect. Risk exists, yes, but we can control it with planning and timing. The Queen nodded. Prepare the fleets. This operation will show the enemy that we are not defeated. We fight smart and we fight together. The fleets moved silently through space, splitting into smaller units as planned. Each fleet approached its target carefully, scanning for signs of the enemy. When the first convoy was struck, it was like a spark lighting a chain reaction. Enemy forces rushed to respond, but their numbers were divided, leaving other sectors vulnerable. The Queen's main fleet waited patiently, hidden in deep space. As the enemy diverted attention to scattered attacks, the Queen's forces struck with precision. Key fleets were disabled, supply stations destroyed, and enemy communication lines disrupted. The operation succeeded with minimal losses to her forces. Reports reached the council. The enemy was furious. They had underestimated the Queen's forces and had fallen into a carefully prepared trap. Ships were lost, commanders frustrated, and their strategy was thrown into chaos. Generals who had once doubted the human's plan now nodded in approval. The tide was shifting. The human continued to guide operations from the command center. He suggested adjustments, identified vulnerabilities, and anticipated enemy reactions. His strategy was methodical, and the results spoke for themselves. The Queen watched him closely, feeling a deep respect for the calm determination he displayed. The enemy attempted to retaliate. They concentrated a fleet to strike at one of the Queen's key planets, hoping to regain control. But the human had anticipated this move. Smaller fleets executed feints and diversions, drawing the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, the Queen's main fleet struck at the enemy's vulnerable points, crippling their attacking force. The battle was decisive. The enemy, though still powerful, suffered significant losses. Their overconfidence had led them into a trap, and the Queen's forces exploited it expertly. Morale soared among her soldiers. News of the victory spread quickly, inspiring confidence in allies who had been hesitant to intervene. The Queen addressed her people through the communication network. Today, we have proven that courage, intelligence, and unity are more powerful than fear. The enemy may be strong, but they are not unbeatable. We will continue to fight smart, and we will prevail. Her words were met with cheers across the empire. Soldiers trained harder, engineers worked faster, and allies sent reinforcements. The Queen's forces were small compared to the enemy, but they were now smarter, faster, and more coordinated than anyone had anticipated. Yet the human remained focused. He knew the enemy would not remain passive. They would adapt, regroup, and attempt new strategies. Patience and planning were still essential. The next operation would require even greater precision. The Queen called a meeting to plan the next cycle. Holograms displayed enemy movements, supply lines, and fleet positions. The human suggested a bold approach. We will create a larger diversion, forcing the enemy to overcommit. Then we strike at their most vulnerable fleet. This operation will be decisive if executed correctly. A general raised an objection. It is dangerous. If we fail, we lose everything. The human responded calmly. Every operation carries risk, but we minimize it through planning, timing, and anticipation. We strike where they do not expect. We exploit their mistakes. Success is possible if we act intelligently. The Queen considered the plan carefully. She trusted the human's judgment, and the results of previous operations had proven his strategy effective. We proceed, she commanded. The fleets moved into position. Small units created diversions, attacking minor enemy outposts and supply stations. The enemy responded immediately, sending fleets to defend and recapture these positions. Their forces became divided, leaving the primary target exposed. The Queen's main fleet struck with precision. Enemy ships were disabled, supply lines destroyed, and key communication hubs taken out. The operation succeeded flawlessly. The enemy had been lured into overextending, and the Queen's forces had exploited it expertly. The enemy commanders were stunned. They had underestimated the alien Queen and her human advisor. Their confidence was shaken. Mistakes that would not have occurred against conventional tactics were now common. Their fleets were scattered, their morale low, and their command structure strained. The Queen's council celebrated the success. Generals who had doubted the human strategies now praised him openly. The Queen acknowledged his contribution, though he remained humble and quiet. He had not sought recognition, yet his guidance had been crucial to the victories. The Queen walked to the observation deck, looking out over the capital planet. Stars sparkled in the distance, serene and constant, while the war raged below. She felt a sense of hope she had not experienced in cycles. Her people were fighting with confidence, her allies were engaged, and the enemy was faltering. The human joined her quietly. "The enemy will adapt," he said. "They will attempt new strategies. We must be ready." The Queen nodded. "I trust your judgment. Your strategies have saved us more than once. We will continue to fight smart, and we will prevail." The next cycles brought new challenges. The enemy attempted ambushes, feints, and surprise attacks, but the Queen's forces were prepared. Each move was anticipated, each weakness exploited. The human guided operations with careful precision, ensuring minimal losses and maximum impact. The Queen noticed something remarkable. Her people, once demoralized and fearful, were now confident and determined. Soldiers trained harder, engineers repaired ships quickly, and allies sent reinforcements. The Empire was recovering, and the enemy's grip on the galaxy was weakening. For the first time in cycles, the Queen allowed herself to believe that victory was possible. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned. The enemy's overconfidence, combined with the human strategic insight, had created an opportunity that could not be ignored. The human remained quiet, observing and planning. He had not sought glory, yet his actions had changed the course of the war. The Queen understood something important. Courage, intelligence, and careful planning could triumph over raw power. And sometimes the smallest voice, one human who had stood when others were silent, could change everything. Far beyond the war-torn sectors, enemy commanders whispered among themselves. Something had shifted. The alien Queen was no longer defeated. Her forces were coordinated, clever, and patient, and a species they had dismissed as minor was at the center of it all. The human had become more than an advisor. He was a symbol of hope, ingenuity, and courage. And as the galaxy watched, the alien Queen prepared for the final cycles of the war, knowing that with careful planning and determination, victory was within reach. The enemy was desperate. After cycles of careful attacks, small strikes, and precise operations guided by the human, their forces were scattered and demoralized. Entire fleets had been disabled, supply lines destroyed, and communication hubs disrupted. What had seemed an unstoppable empire was now vulnerable. The alien Queen stood on the command deck of her flagship, overlooking the capital planet. Below, her people prepared for the next stage of operations, reinforcing defenses and readying fleets. The Queen's mind was focused, but her heart was full of cautious hope. The war that had once seemed lost was now winnable. The human stood quietly at her side. He did not issue orders, but his presence was a calm force, a reminder of the strategies that had guided them through countless cycles. He had become indispensable, not because of strength or weapons, but because of insight, careful planning, and an ability to see opportunity where others saw only despair. Reports arrived quickly. Enemy forces were retreating in sectors where they had previously been strongest. Their overconfidence had led them into traps repeatedly. Minor fleets and supply convoys had been struck, forcing them to divide their strength. Each mistake left them weaker and more frustrated. The Queen addressed her generals and advisors. "The enemy has grown careless, but they are still dangerous. We will not underestimate them. We act carefully, strike decisively, and take advantage of every opportunity they give us." A general nodded. "Your Majesty, the enemy is faltering." If we strike now, we could force them into surrender. The human spoke quietly. We do not rush, we act strategically. Patience will ensure minimal losses and maximum impact. We finish the war with precision, not desperation. The queen trusted him. She had seen the results. His guidance had saved countless lives and turned the tide of battles that had seemed impossible. She had learned an important lesson. Sometimes, victory did not come from the strongest weapon or the largest fleet. It came from intelligence, courage, and patience. The next operation was bold. The enemy had concentrated their remaining strength near a key sector, hoping to cut off the Queen's allies and regain control. The Queen and her council devised a plan that used every lesson they had learned from the human. Diversions, feints, and small precise attacks forced the enemy to split their forces. The Queen's main fleet then struck at the enemy's most vulnerable points, cutting off reinforcements and isolating key ships. The battle was intense, but careful planning ensured the Queen's forces prevailed. Enemy fleets were destroyed or forced to retreat. Supply lines were disrupted permanently. The remaining enemy commanders had no choice but to retreat further, their confidence shattered. Victory, once a distant hope, was now within reach. News of the victory spread quickly across the galaxy. Allied worlds sent reinforcements and messages of support. Soldiers cheered, engineers repaired and upgraded ships. Citizens celebrated cautiously, aware that the war was not yet fully over but grateful for the clear shift in momentum. The Queen gathered her council for the first time since the major victory. She addressed them with calm authority. We have survived when all seemed lost. We have fought wisely, struck precisely, and turned fear into hope. The enemy is retreating, and our people have learned what courage and strategy can accomplish. But we must remain vigilant. The war is not fully won until the enemy admits defeat. The human remained at her side, quietly observing. His calm presence reminded everyone that intelligence and patience had brought them this far. He had never sought recognition, yet the council now looked at him with respect. Even those who had doubted him earlier admitted that his guidance had been essential. The enemy, now scattered and disoriented, attempted a few minor attacks. But the Queen's forces were prepared. Each engagement was carefully managed, ensuring minimal losses. The human anticipated enemy movements, guiding the Queen's fleet to strike at the right time and place. The enemy's remaining fleets were gradually defeated or forced to retreat beyond their controlled sectors. Finally, a message arrived. The enemy's commanders requested a meeting for peace negotiations. They admitted their mistakes and acknowledged that further resistance was futile. The alien Queen, who had once faced total defeat, now held the power to dictate terms. The Queen convened her council. "This is our chance," she said. "We will secure peace, protect our people, and ensure the galaxy remembers that cunning, patience, and courage are just as important as strength." The negotiations were successful. The enemy agreed to terms that preserved the Queen's empire and ensured the safety of allied worlds. The war that had seemed unwinnable had been turned around, not by superior fleets, but by careful strategy, intelligence, and the courage to act differently. During the celebration that followed, the Queen addressed her people. "We have endured when hope was lost. We have fought with wisdom, courage, and unity. Our allies have stood with us. And one among us, though not of our people, has reminded us that even the smallest voice can change the course of events. Humanity has shown us strength, patience, and insight. Let it be known that their contribution was vital to our survival." The crowd turned to see the humans who had guided the Queen. Cheers erupted. People who had once doubted humanity now recognized them as heroes. The humans did not seek applause, but they received it anyway, their calm demeanor unchanged by the recognition. The Queen approached the human who had first stood in the Grand War Hall. "You have done more than I could have imagined," she said. "You have guided us through impossible challenges. You have shown that courage, intelligence, and insight can change the fate of worlds." "I will never forget this," the human bowed respectfully. "I only offered guidance, Your Majesty. Your people acted with bravery and wisdom. Victory is yours," the Queen smiled. "No, victory is ours because we acted together, because one voice spoke when others were silent. Because we believed that hope was possible. You remind us that strength is more than fleets and weapons. It is courage, intelligence, and endurance." In the days that followed, the Queen worked to restore her empire. Planets were rebuilt, trade routes reopened, and fleets repaired. Allies strengthened their bonds, and the human and his team assisted in planning for future defense. The Queen often reflected on how one small voice had changed everything. She had faced despair, and yet hope had returned, not through raw power, but through courage and insight. Humanity had reminded her people of the value of intelligence, patience, and clever thinking. Far beyond her empire, other species in the galaxy began to whisper about the humans. They had seen what a single human could accomplish. They had witnessed how careful strategy, courage, and intelligence had turned the tide of a war that seemed lost. The galaxy began to respect, and perhaps fear, the potential of humanity. The Queen held a private ceremony to honor the humans. She presented them with the highest recognition of her empire, praising their courage, insight, and selflessness. The humans accepted humbly, their focus still on planning and observing, not glory. The Queen realized something profound. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, assuming weakness where there was intelligence and courage. She had learned that hope could come from unexpected places, that victory could be achieved with patience and cleverness, and that even the smallest voice could echo across the stars. As the Queen looked toward the stars from her throne, she thought of the human who had stood when everyone else remained silent. The war had been won not by overwhelming power, but by insight, strategy, and courage. Humanity had proven that even when all seemed lost, one voice, one act of courage could change everything. The Queen smiled, knowing the galaxy had changed forever. Humanity had earned respect, not through conquest, but through wisdom, endurance, and courage. The war had been a test, and the humans had passed with distinction. And so, the alien Queen ruled her empire in peace, strengthened by allies and inspired by humanity. The enemy had been defeated, the galaxy had witnessed the unexpected power of intelligence and courage, and the humans, once considered minor, had proven that even the smallest voice could stand against the greatest odds. The human returned to his place quietly, observing the celebrations. He did not seek recognition, yet the galaxy had recognized him. He had acted with wisdom, patience, and courage, guiding the alien Queen to victory. And in doing so, he had changed the course of history, ensuring that humanity would never again be underestimated. The Queen knew that future challenges would arise. But she also knew that with intelligence, courage, and the unexpected insight of allies like humanity, her empire could survive anything. She had learned the most important lesson of all: hope, courage, and cleverness could triumph over even the greatest of giants. And far across the stars, civilizations whispered the lesson they would never forget.